Hey there, I hope you're doing well. My name is Adam and today we're going to look at some more Reddit stories. If you enjoy Reddit stories, consider liking, subscribing, and maybe hitting that notification bell too. Let's get started with today's first story. Much love, everyone. Today's first story comes from my husband got back at me for cheating Reddit relationship advice. I can't believe I'm the one writing this, but here I am to keep things confidential. I'll speak in general terms and use fake names. Let's call my husband Deegan and me Jenny. We're both in our 20s and have been married for over 2 years. We crossed paths unexpectedly in public, started chatting, exchanged contact info, and the rest, as they say, is history. It felt like love at first sight, at least for me. We dated for 6 months and then lived together for a year before tying the knot. Due to my parents' insistence, we had a large wedding. They covered all the expenses except for the bar tab and our honeymoon, which Deegan's parents paid for. My parents adore Deegan and his parents have a deep affection for me. Our marriage has been fantastic and I wouldn't change a thing. Deegan treats me exceptionally well and I do the same for him. It's just our natural way of expressing love. Now, you might wonder, what's the issue here? Well, the problem is that I cheated on Deegan with a colleague from work 2 months ago and now I'm burdened with guilt. Whenever Deegan does something kind for me, I feel terrible inside. I'm overwhelmed with guilt and a sense of not deserving his kindness in an attempt to make amends for my betrayal. I've been exceptionally attentive to him since we returned from our trip. While we've always been naturally affectionate with each other, I'm taking it to another level. My dad even playfully teases us, suggesting we get a room because we're constantly engaged in some form of public display of affection. Like I mentioned earlier, I won't delve into details, but I want to clarify how things unfolded with my coworker. I was chosen to join a special work team at my company. This project was a significant venture for the company and held great importance for our shareholders. Working on this assignment was satisfying, but incredibly demanding and stressful. To the extent that one of our team members, a woman, experienced a nervous breakdown. Most of our work on the project was done remotely, but we did have 3 in-person team meetings along the way as we neared the project's completion. Something went wrong with the part I was responsible for. This required me to spend a week at one of our regional offices to fix the issue. Initially, 3 of us were scheduled to go, but at the last minute the woman I mentioned, who had the nervous breakdown, had to cancel for obvious reasons. This left me and another coworker, whom I'll call Percy, to tackle the problem and ensure the project met its deadline. We were on a tight schedule and worked continuously from 7 a.m. to well past 10 p.m. for the first 2 nights, spending every available moment together. We worked together in the office and ordered food for both lunch and dinner. I was extremely stressed, and I felt like I was about to have a nervous breakdown as well. Thankfully, by 4 p.m. on Wednesday, we managed to solve the problem to celebrate. We went to a nice restaurant and had a bit too much to drink. After returning to the hotel, one thing led to another, and I cheated on my husband. It was a spontaneous, thoughtless action at first. I didn't have any negative feelings about it because I somehow justified it due to our hard work. So the next night Percy and I repeated what we did the night before. However, after being together on Thursday, the harsh reality of our actions hit me and then Percy. We quickly regretted what we had done. Percy knew I was happily married and I knew he was engaged to be married. We decided right then and there to forget about it as if it never happened. We were also worried that if news of this affair ever got out within our company, it could damage our reputations and potentially jeopardize our jobs, since it occurred during a company-paid business trip. We went our separate ways that night and agreed not to speak or communicate unless absolutely necessary. It wouldn't be too difficult, since the project we worked on was a unique situation and we lived on opposite sides of the country, making it unlikely for us to cross paths. Again, we ended things that night, or so I thought, on the flight back home. I felt fine at first, but then I started feeling anxious when I thought about meeting Deegan at the airport. I managed to hold myself together until I reached the pickup area and saw him waiting there wearing a big smile as soon as I laid eyes on him. I burst into tears and we hugged and kissed each other, repeatedly holding on tightly. We were locked in that embrace for so long that an airport police officer approached us, tapping on the window and signaling us to clear the pickup lane. Deegan asked me what was wrong and I explained that I had been under immense stress and missed him so much that I couldn't help but break down when I saw him. He understood, and that night we shared a beautiful and passionate night together. Since I returned from the trip, I've been taking extra care of him. He's enjoying the attention and deserves it, but inside I'm suffering. Guilt is eating away at my mind and it's getting worse by the day. I struggle with sleep and appetite, and it's affecting my work. All I want is to be close to my husband and show him how much I love him. I even have recurring nightmares about him discovering the affair and leaving me. Last week we decided to try to conceive a child, which has heightened my emotions about everything. I keep thinking that I don't deserve him or that he deserves someone better. I don't believe I can continue like this for another week. No one knows about the affair except for Percy and me. My situation gets even tougher because I have nobody to confide in. I sense my inner conscience urging me to be truthful and tell Deegan about my actions, but I'm terrified that it will cost me our relationship. I understand that if I confess it will devastate him and he might not see me the same way again. However, I believe he might eventually forgive me given his deep love for me and his naturally kind and caring nature. So here's my dilemma: should I disclose my meaningless affair from 2 months ago to my husband, or should I stay silent and make amends in other ways? I'd really appreciate hearing from those of you who faced a similar situation and how you handled it. Please be honest and share both the positive and negative outcomes. First update: 32 days after my initial post, I want to express my gratitude to all of you for your heartfelt responses. I've carefully read each one and value your willingness to share your personal experiences. After much contemplation and 3 counseling sessions with an excellent therapist, I've decided to tell my husband it's going to be incredibly tough for me and it will undoubtedly devastate him, but it's something I have to do to prepare for this. I've created a detailed timeline of the affair, which wasn't difficult since it was purely physical and lasted less than 24 hours, with no emotional involvement. My therapist has also provided me with some helpful articles on how to support a spouse dealing with infidelity, specifically what actions to avoid. I'm mentally prepared for the possibility that he might need some time apart from me. Based on what I've learned, this reaction is entirely normal, although I will be saddened if he chooses to react that way. As I mentioned earlier, my husband is an affectionate and caring man. He's generous and protective, so I don't anticipate him responding in that manner to this news. Instead, I believe he will be hurt and disappointed by my actions. I'm mentally prepared for a range of responses. Keep your fingers crossed for me. 13 months after my previous update. Hello, everyone. It's been quite some time since I last posted here. Many of you have reached out inquiring about the progress of my situation. I want to express my gratitude for your interest and concern. I intended to provide an update earlier, but life got pretty hectic and I simply didn't have the time or energy. Things have finally started to settle down for me recently. So here I am. I'll continue where I left off. If you recall, I was about to confess to my husband about the short-lived affair I had with a coworker. My plan was to have that conversation on a Saturday morning, and I followed through with it. I ensured that we'd both be present that morning, because we had plans for the afternoon and I wanted to talk without interruptions on the morning of the confession. I was a bundle of nerves and I almost backed out of it. Looking back now, I wish I had. I prepared Deegan's favorite breakfast and after we ate, I disclosed the affair to him. He listened attentively as I spoke without uttering a word. When I finished, he gazed at me as if he were peering right through me, then he excused himself and retreated to the office. Closing the door behind him, I approached the door and attempted to turn the handle, but it was locked. I spoke to him through the door, reiterating how sorry I was and expressing my love for him. I informed him that I'd be waiting in the living room when he was ready to talk. Based on what I had read in articles, it suggested that those who have strayed should give the betrayed partner plenty of space. So that's precisely what I did. After a few minutes, I thought I heard him talking to someone, so I quietly went back to the door to see if I could make out the conversation. Unfortunately, I couldn't, so I returned to the living room. Then I received a call from my mom, which I let go to voicemail, because I didn't have the time to talk to her. About 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. When I looked out, I saw my parents standing there. I opened the door and was about to suggest they come back later because Deacon and I were in the middle of a private discussion. However, my mom mentioned that Deacon had called them and confessed everything. I couldn't believe it and was left speechless. My dad asked if it was true, and I asked True about what my dad inquired. Did you have an affair with one of your coworkers? I admitted to it and started crying. My mom asked how I could do such a thing before I could respond. Deacon emerged from the office and began conversing with my parents, completely ignoring me and referring to me in the third person. He requested that my dad take me away from there as he wasn't in a good state of mind. I continued to try to communicate with him, but he kept ignoring me, focusing solely on my parents, as though I were invisible, desperate for his attention. I approached him and hugged him, though he didn't push me away. He didn't hug me back either after I let go of him. He returned to the office and locked the door. My parents began asking me questions about the affair, which upset me, and I ran into the bedroom. My mom followed me in and we had a conversation for a while, and then she helped me pack a few things before leaving. I spoke to Deacon through the door, expressing my love for him and stating that I would stay away until he was ready to talk. I informed him that I was heading to my parents' house and would remain there as long as he needed. I didn't receive any communication from him for the rest of the day. I attempted to contact him several times, but he didn't respond in my final text. I mentioned that I was coming over because I was worried about him. He replied and requested that I give him some space. I spent the entire day crying and repeatedly asking myself how something like this could happen. When I woke up on Sunday morning, my parents were sitting at the table drinking coffee with sad expressions on their faces. I thought they were upset about my actions, but there was more to it. My dad informed me that Deacon had come over earlier that morning. I was excited and inquired if they had spoken to him. My dad replied, "No, we didn't see him." I then asked how they knew he was there. My dad explained that it was because he had left my car in the driveway filled with all my belongings. Upon hearing this, I simply said what and rushed out to the driveway, where I saw my SUV parked and packed to the brim with trash bags. Seeing that I broke down and fell to the ground crying, I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. I told my parents that I needed to go to my house to speak with Deacon upon my arrival. He was at home but didn't answer the door. I attempted to unlock the doors using my keys, but the internal deadbolts were engaged and I couldn't gain access. My next thought was to enter through the garage, but when I checked my visor, I realized Deacon had taken the remote. My idea was to enter through the garage keypad, but he had changed the code effectively, locking me out of my own house. Given the early hour on a Sunday morning, I didn't want to disturb the neighbors, so I started texting him. Initially, I was polite, but when he didn't respond, I sent a text expressing that it was my place too, and he couldn't just lock me out. His response was simply sue me. I couldn't believe that the man I had once loved deeply and who had been kind and caring was treating me this way. I knew I deserved consequences, but not like this. At the very least, I expected him to be civil and not behave like someone irrational. Ultimately, I returned to my parents' house, locked myself in my old room and spent most of the day in tears, utterly bewildered by the events of the past 24 hours. Throughout the day I continued my attempts to contact Deacon, but he remained unresponsive. On Monday morning, I contacted my boss and requested 3 days off to address the situation. I returned to the house on Monday morning and managed to gain entry. Deacon was not there, and when I entered our bedroom, I noticed that all of his clothes were gone. It was when I entered the office that I saw something that shattered me. I discovered our wedding album cover beside the shredder, and Deacon had removed all the pictures and shredded them. I couldn't believe it as I walked around the house. I noticed that all the pictures of us had disappeared upon further searching. I found the empty frames and it became clear that he had shredded those as well. I felt deeply saddened and couldn't comprehend what was unfolding. I decided to call Deegan's workplace and spoke with the receptionist. I inquired if I could speak with him and she informed me that he wouldn't be in the office for the remainder of the week as he had taken the week off. I then reached out to my mother-in-law. She picked up the call and mentioned that Deegan had already informed her and my father-in-law about everything. I asked if she knew his whereabouts and she confirmed that she did but declined to tell me and abruptly ended the conversation. I felt hurt by this situation, as I had a close relationship with my in-laws. On Wednesday of that week, I started receiving calls from Percy. I chose to ignore all his calls and sent them to voicemail afterward. When I listened to his messages, he was urgently requesting me to call him as soon as possible. Finally, in his last message, he mentioned that Deegan had somehow contacted his fiancée and disclosed everything about the two of us. Upon hearing this, I called Percy and he was angry. He reminded me that we had promised not to disclose anything to anyone. I acknowledged this and admitted that I should have informed him before speaking to my husband, but I hadn't anticipated his reaction. Percy then revealed that he had told his fiancée that my husband was lying and that nothing had occurred. He informed me that she intended to call me, and he insisted that I tell her the same story. I informed him that I couldn't comply with that request and he began pleading with me once I reiterated my refusal to lie. He started verbally attacking me using hurtful words and insults. He wouldn't stop. So I decided to end the call by hanging up on him and blocking his number. Shortly after, I received a call from his fiancée and I disclosed everything to her. She remained silent as I recounted the events, and when I finished she abruptly hung up. However, the ordeal didn't conclude there. When I returned to work the next day, I was summoned to the office of the HR director, who happened to be a friend of mine. Initially, I didn't suspect anything amiss, but upon arriving, I noticed the HR manager and the director of security were also present. I had a feeling I might be in trouble. They asked me to take a seat and mentioned that they had some questions for me. They informed me that they had been contacted by someone alleging that Percy and I had engaged in an affair during company time and had utilized company resources. My heart sank and I started to cry. I then proceeded to confess what had occurred, but clarified that nothing had happened during official work hours. The HR director explained that when salaried employees travel for business, the entire trip is considered work time. She went on to clarify that the hotel room is regarded as a company resource since it was paid for by the company. They proceeded to inquire about the second night when Percy and I were together. They asked if I had dinner with Percy that evening, and I reluctantly admitted that I had. They followed up by asking if I had consumed wine, to which I replied affirmatively, disclosing that I had 2 glasses. Next, they inquired if I had bought the wine, and I responded that I hadn't. Percy had made the purchase. The HR director pointed out that this violated company policy, because employees are not allowed to use another employee's card for food or drinks. As a result, I received a final written warning for these infractions, while Percy faced termination. To clarify, there was no preferential treatment. Due to my gender, Percy would have faced the same consequences if those were the only issues, but unfortunately, for him there was more to his situation. Percy got terminated because he extended his stay by an extra day without a legitimate business reason and charged the entire expense, including the flight change, the hotel stay and all his meals, which included the 2 bottles of wine. He extended his stay solely to be with me. The following evening, I feel deeply remorseful about what happened to Percy. He was an outstanding employee with a promising future, but now he's unemployed and his fiancée left him all because of my actions. As for me, any aspirations of getting a promotion in the aftermath of this incident seem unlikely to add to the turmoil. The following Monday at work, Deegan had divorce papers served to me at the reception desk. The receptionist called to inform me that there was a delivery up front. As I arrived there, a man was waiting with a box of flowers. I hoped they were a gift from Deegan, and indeed they were. However, after I signed for the package, the man handed me the flowers and then delivered the divorce papers stating, "Mrs. Jenny, you have officially been served with divorce papers." My world fell apart at that moment and I couldn't hold back my tears. I had to leave the office and decided to take the rest of the week off over the next 7 months. I made every effort to salvage my marriage, but Deegan refused to engage with me at all. In fact, he hasn't uttered a single word to me since I confessed. Our divorce has now been finalized, but I'm still struggling emotionally. I cherish and miss the kind man he used to be before my affair, but I understand that person no longer exists. I acknowledge that I deserve to face consequences for my actions, but I never anticipated Deegan's reaction. I knew there was a slim chance that my confession could end our relationship, but I believe that likelihood was exceedingly rare. I want to conclude with a message for my husband, babe. If you ever come across this, I want you to know that I am genuinely sorry and will love you eternally, all right? That was a fun story. Now, let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I'm 36 years old and my wife is 38. We first crossed paths when I was in my 3rd year of college and she was in her 4th. Since that day, we've been together. After dating for 3 years, we made the decision to move in together. Then, after 3 more years, we tied the knot. 2 years after that, our happiness grew when my wife became pregnant and we welcomed our daughter into the world. Like any typical family, we had our fair share of domestic disagreements, but we always managed to reconcile swiftly, sometimes even in the middle of an argument. In general, we were a traditional family. Once I completed my education, I embarked on my career journey, working hard to climb the corporate ladder. Eventually, I earned enough to afford a spacious, 4-room apartment. We invested significantly in renovating it and happily settled into our new home. My wife, after her maternity leave, resumed her career, which went quite smoothly. She secured a good position and started earning a decent income with our combined earnings. We achieved financial prosperity over time. We acquired everything we needed, including a new apartment for our growing daughter, luxurious cars and all the comforts one could desire. Life felt abundant. I held deep love for my wife and remained faithful to her throughout our marriage. I wasn't a heavy drinker, but occasionally I'd enjoy a glass of wine with dinner. I recently gave up smoking. We always planned our vacations together and I developed a passion for diving and skiing. While my wife chose not to dive due to fear, she took up skiing. Our lives revolved around working, earning money, and savoring the rewards of our hard work. My wife's job was related to international business, often involving meetings with colleagues from abroad for negotiations. Gradually, I began to notice that her interactions with these colleagues appeared to be longer than before. While it initially piqued my curiosity, I didn't pay much attention to it at first. Another notable change was her receiving Snapchat messages in the evenings. Oddly, when her foreign colleagues were around, these messages stopped coming a couple of times. I checked her phone after she had fallen asleep, but all the messages had been deleted. I observed that the last message consistently arrived around 7 p.m., even though her phone received notifications after she had already gone to bed. In the end, suspicion completely consumed me. One evening, she arrived home late around 10 p.m. and I perhaps foolishly jokingly inquired if she had bid farewell to her secret admirer. I witnessed a fear in her eyes like never before. However, once she realized I was teasing, she smiled and dismissed it, calling me a fool. Furthermore, she occasionally traveled abroad to visit her colleagues in return. When my suspicions peaked, I reached a breaking point. I resorted to installing spyware on her phone, enabling remote control through SMS or my personal account. This software could capture audio from her surroundings, take pictures with the camera and send all the data to my personal account. One day she embarked on another business trip and in the evening, after spending time with our daughter, assisting her with homework and putting her to bed by 10 p.m., I accessed the spyware account and instructed it to record her phone's surroundings for 10 minutes. A few minutes later, a recording popped up on my account, and upon listening, I heard my wife's voice in a room with a man. They conversed in English and I comprehended every word. Their discussion revolved around ordinary life matters, accompanied by laughter. I realized they were alone in that room, then a sudden clinking of glasses, amid their laughter, sent my heart racing. At that instant, I sent another command to record for an additional 20 minutes and capture an image of the surroundings. Shockingly, the photo came out as a dark square indicating the phone was placed with the camera facing down swiftly. I directed the program to snap a picture using the front camera. The resulting photo showed the phone resting on the bedside table in the room, partially capturing the bed's headboard and an adjacent wall lamp. 15 minutes later, another recording emerged, sending shivers down my spine as I played it. Their laughter and conversation filled my ears once more. I found myself in a state of disbelief and shock, as if my entire world were collapsing right before my eyes, stunned. I poured myself a drink and instructed the program to record for an additional 4 hours, during which I drowned my sorrows in alcohol. The following morning, Thursday, I was utterly shattered, as it was time for my daughter to go to school. I informed her that she didn't need to attend classes. That day, I also notified my boss that I would be taking a couple of personal days until Monday. My wife's expected return was on Sunday, so I settled down and began listening to the 4-hour recording. However, I could only bear to listen for 40 minutes, because at that moment I unmistakably heard the sounds of my wife's pleasure. The same sounds I had known for over 13 years, it felt like a sharp knife, had pierced my heart, causing both emotional and physical anguish, stunned and overwhelmed. I hurried to the bathroom, feeling nauseous. I couldn't tell if it was a hangover or the current situation causing it. I stood under a freezing shower for 20 minutes, desperately seeking relief afterward. I took our daughter to visit her grandparents, promising to explain everything later, and then returned home alone. During lunch, my wife called and genuinely inquired about my well-being. I stood there in silence, unable to utter a word, feigning a poor connection. I informed her that I wasn't feeling well and would stay home for a few days, entrusting our daughter to her grandmother's care. That day felt like the most agonizing of my life. I experienced a personal hell, feeling utterly lost and unsure of how to proceed. My mind was consumed by a constant buzzing that drowned out my own thoughts. I sat on the couch and wept like a child, overwhelmed by waves of anger and apathy. The more I let my emotions out, the more they seemed to numb me by the day's end. I was emotionally drained in the evening. I returned to the spyware account and began giving commands to the phone. I received photos, some taken from her bag and others from the table. There were recordings of her performances in restaurants with numerous voices, presumably her colleagues. Then, as the evening progressed, I stumbled upon something different. The phone was once again on the bedside table, capturing her voice along with someone else's. However, this time there were no intimate sounds, unable to endure it any longer. I called her after 4 rings. She answered, noticeably panting. I inquired about her heavy breathing, and she explained that the hotel elevator had broken down, forcing her to climb the stairs to her room. We talked for a while, and I did my best to maintain a calm and steady voice. Eventually, I mentioned that I was going to bed, wished her good night, hung up, and swiftly sent a command to the spy program, requesting a rapid series of pictures using the front camera. Her mistake occurred right then. After our call, she placed the phone not on the bedside table, but on the bed beside her. As a result, the front-facing camera started capturing slightly tilted but candid photos. These images revealed her sitting astride someone else with her head thrown back. Following that, there was a recording that captured unmistakable sounds instantly, exposing her actions. That was the final straw for me, and I documented these notes and materials. At that point, she had become a complete stranger to me. From that moment on, I refrained from further investigation until Sunday, because everything had become painfully clear. I was pondering my next steps. Should I pursue a divorce? What about our 6-year-old daughter? On Sunday late at night, she returned home eager to kiss me. I pulled away, telling her I was still unwell. I had an urge to confront her and let my anger out. Instead, I retreated to the office and slept on the sofa the following morning. I woke up before her, couldn't bear to be around her any longer, and headed to work. I endured the day mechanically, then approached my boss and urgently requested a week's vacation. I saved all the proof on a flash drive and then phoned my wife. I told her I had to go on a Onedi business trip, but asked her not to take our daughter away from her grandmother, because I had a surprise planned that night. When I returned home, I packed my bag quickly. She helped me pack, acting politely and innocently. However, her insincerity made me angry. I took my bag, left the USB drive on the bedroom nightstand, and called a taxi to our second apartment, the one set aside for our daughter. Once there, I called a friend and suggested going abroad for a few days. He agreed, and we hastily booked tickets for an early morning flight to Munich. It was in Munich that I confessed everything to him. We explored the city, socialized with other women, and, to be honest, I no longer had any feelings for my wife. I ignored her calls and only messaged her to insert the USB drive into my laptop after about 30 minutes. My phone started ringing non-stop and I received numerous messages, but I didn't care anymore, so I turned off my phone. We continued our adventures in Munich for 3 more days before I flew back home on Saturday. When I returned, I turned on my phone and it took me 5 minutes to go through a bunch of messages from my wife. However, I chose not to read them because I was afraid of getting confused before going into the apartment. When I entered, it was oddly quiet inside. I quietly placed my bag down, removed my shoes, and was about to wash my hands when she emerged from the bedroom. Oh, my goodness, I had never seen her looking so disheveled and swollen, with tears streaming down her face. She dropped to her knees, trying to explain something incoherently. Amidst her sobs and tears, I maintained a stoic expression, urging her not to make a scene. Then, in a composed manner, I asked her about our next steps. She begged me for forgiveness, once again drowning in tears and mucus. She admitted she had made a terrible mistake, claiming she didn't understand how things had come to this point. She even started calling herself names and so on, but I realized that I no longer felt sympathy or anger toward her. She cried out that she loved me and had always loved only me, and that all of this had happened because she had been foolish and realized during my absence that she had ruined our relationship. But as they say, revenge is best served cold. I told her that we were no longer husband and wife, just mom and dad for our daughter. We would pretend everything was okay between us, but I would live my life and she could live hers. She was no longer the only one in my life. She was just my partner in raising our child. Maybe someday I'll change my mind, but for now the thought of being intimate with her makes me sick. By the way, I told her where I had been and what I had been doing. She said she understood everything and was willing to endure whatever it took. Well, no one forced her to speak as a result. We now share the same apartment, although, to be honest, I've already purchased another one for myself and put it in my father's name to avoid property disputes. I spend most of my time sleeping in the office, although occasionally I sleep in the bedroom for my daughter's sake. There have been a few times when my wife tried to hug me when we shared a bed, but I rejected her firmly. It's been 3 months since we were intimate. She hasn't confided in her parents. Only her father knows about my situation. We agreed to take a family vacation once a year for a week, but now we'd have separate beds. I often hang out with friends and have made new acquaintances, including some attractive women. Sometimes I wonder when she'll reach a breaking point and leave or file for divorce, but she hasn't yet. I frequently catch her staring at me like a scared cat. But honestly, I don't care. Even though I see you're making efforts, I find satisfaction in her pain. Recently, I provocatively placed a pack of rubbers on my office desk to taunt her. Despite her reaction, she entered the office to say something, notice the rubbers on the table, and hurried out, probably in tears. She still goes to work, but she doesn't stay late anymore, although I don't really keep tabs on her. At some point, she tried to explain to me that she had severed all non-business ties with another man. It seems she'll still need to communicate with him for work-related matters, but she swears she doesn't approach him now. By the way, that guy also has a family. I told her that her relationships with sexual partners are none of my concern and she's free to do as she pleases. She doesn't need to inform me about her intimate encounters. I also stay out late, sometimes now leaving when my daughter goes to bed on Friday nights, for example. Naturally, I don't hold back when it comes to my desires. If I want sex, it happens in the morning. I go to the office to sleep or to the bedroom. If she's not there anymore, there haven't been any changes in our daily routine at home. I continue to do the grocery shopping and I enjoy cooking. We still have a housekeeper for cleaning, so that aspect remains the same. I've been covering the rent for the apartment and I still am not concerned about how or if she's spending her money. Our communication is limited to our daughter or her parents when they visit. Although I have a feeling that if I were to tell my mother-in-law, she might confront her right in front of me, I have a good relationship with my mother-in-law. She's a smart woman who values family strongly. This is probably one reason why my wife doesn't want to leave. It seems like she's afraid of her mom, because she knows her mother would ask what's going on, and I won't lie. In general, I tease my wife as much as I can and I find enjoyment in it. Yes, maybe I've become somewhat of a monster now, but she's the one who brought this out in me, and you know what surprises me? Her persistence and patience. It's like a challenge to me. I wonder how much more she can endure, and please don't start with the whole she's the mother of your child, blah blah blah. She didn't care much about that when she was involved with that guy for half a year. She was going on business trips or having affairs in this city without thinking about our daughter or her husband. No comment whenever I feel like I might soften. I remember that day and what I felt, and it strengthens my resolve. I become unyielding again, so this is how I'm living now. Our daughter is doing well, we're good parents, and I still help her with her schoolwork in the evenings. Our mutual friends are unaware of our situation. Maybe when I get tired of tormenting her or decide enough is enough, I'll switch off my hostile mode and have a conversation with her, but not right now, not now. Thank you. I'm going to turn this one over to you. What do you make of this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart for getting involved in today's stories. Your love, support, and time mean the world to me. So, thank you so much for being part of this. I really appreciate your time. I'll see you in the next one. Take care and much love.